Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my round 2 game from the 2017 Western States Open. I had the black pieces here, and my opponent with the white pieces had a rating of 1537, and my rating for the tournament was 1765. I was a little surprised that his rating was so low. This is a Class B section, so it's 1600 and up, but you are allowed to play up. But usually, well, most commonly that's done by the kids that are trying to work their way up. So it was a little bit surprising to see an established player playing up that much. So I looked up his history afterwards, and it turns out he hadn't played for a long time. So he played a lot in the late 1990s and had a solid B rating, and then didn't play for a long time. And then he started playing again this year in 2017, and he played in uh, 3 or 4 tournaments before this one. I forget exactly the number. And so his rating had dropped from above 1600 to down to 1537, where it was for this tournament. So that happens if you take a long layoff from chess and then you start playing again. It takes you a while to get back to where you were. So that's his story. He's working his way back to Class B, and that's probably why he wanted to play in the Class B section here. So anyway, he's got the white pieces. He started off with e4, go e5, knight f3, knight c6, and bishop b5, the Ruy Lopez. So I go for the Morphy defense with a6. This is the main line. Bishop a4, knight f6, castles. And now the main line here continues with bishop to e7. And that's the closed Ruy Lopez. And I have played that, but I don't know, in the last 10 years or so, I've been playing the Neo-Archangelsk variation more often. It just leads to more tactical positions. It's kind of fun. So you kick the bishop back first with pawn to b5, and then you develop this bishop out here to c5. This is the Neo-Archangelsk variation. And yeah, it's an interesting way to play. There are lines where white can actually win a pawn, but black gets compensation. This pawn structure over here is kind of weak and often comes under attack. And in fact, one of the moves here, the top choice here is c3, just traditional build-up of the center that you see in the Ruy Lopez, and trying to expose a weakness on e5 after d4 is pushed. Another way of playing, the second choice here is a4, just immediately going after these pawns on the queen side, which are maybe a bit exposed. And then my opponent played the third choice here, which is d3. So after d3, you need to shore up the center with d6 anyway, because, well, various things can happen to this knight here, and so this pawn this pawn becomes weak. Plus, you want to have the freedom to maneuver that knight around. And then he played h3 here. So h3 is not a common move in this position. If we go back to this game position, the most common move here is c3, with the idea of if I play knight a5, then the bishop can tuck itself away on c2. So h3 actually allows me to grab the bishop pair, and that's what I should do. I can't really explain why I didn't play this move. Knight a5 is the best move here according to the chess engine. We're basically pretty much out of the opening book at this point. Well, not quite. I think this is still in the opening book, but he can't defend the bishop, and so black gets the bishop pair here, and this is a good position. Well, at the end, basically black is equalized by playing knight a5. Instead, I played the move knight to e7, and we're just out of the opening book here, and probably not, well, it's definitely not the best move. Knight a5 is the best move. And like I said, I can't really explain why I didn't just play knight a5. Maybe I just felt like playing something a little different. I thought his moves over here were kind of slow, so probably I was just thinking to go directly for some kingside attack. One thing about the white side of the Ruy Lopez is that white really is lagging in development here. I just need to castle and develop my bishop. But, well, these pieces get into the action surprisingly quickly, so white's position is really not bad at all. And after knight e7, actually, white should be okay. The chess engine wants white to continue like this. Bishop g5. Let's see, I would have played knight to g6 here, so that I could take back with the queen and also have the idea of kicking this bishop and capturing it with the knight if it doesn't retreat back in this direction. So this setup makes unpinning easy. Let's see, but white can continue developing with knight c3, say h6 kicking. The chess engine says that white should just give up the bishop pair at this point and then take advantage of the knight being traded off and put a bishop on this good square with the tempo, rook to b8. And now there's even the idea of bishop to c6 in this position, forcing me to move my king or block with the bishop. And a trade, giving up the other bishop would also force me to move my king. So it looks like white has an edge in this position, and that's the best way for white to play after I played this knight e7 move. Instead, he continued with c3, a very typical Ruy Lopez move, building up the center. I just castle here, and he goes d4. Right here, the chess engine prefers the move a4, once again, undermining these pawns. But d4 is a reasonable move in this position. But there is a weakness here that I didn't fully realize. So the best way for me to play this is to just drop the bishop back. And, I didn't want to do this because I saw that he's winning a pawn here. Pawn takes, and then the knight comes. And I was failing to factor in the fact that he left his e-pawn undefended, and he's losing that one too. So this is the best play for both sides would continue. He should grab this pawn, but then I should grab this pawn. And let's see, he can keep taking here, but I can take back. The engine gives knight to g5 as the next move here. And yeah, I guess this is a position which is about even. One interesting point about this, something to keep in mind, is that the bishop on b6 here is coordinating with the knight on the f2 square. So it's not possible to play a move like rook to e1, which I was a little bit worried about. Sometimes that's a pretty strong move, particularly coming with tempo. But in this case, I can play knight takes f2, pick up another pawn, hit his queen, threaten the king with a discovered check, and that's just devastation. So that would have been the way to play it. Let's go back to the game. Like I said, I was a little worried about losing my e-pawn here. I didn't calculate that out correctly. I was kind of ignoring that I could take on e4. A lot of times it's dangerous to take on e4 because there is the rook coming down the e-file. Can be a pretty dangerous piece, and particularly if you haven't castled. But yeah, in this case, it just works out fine because of the counter pressure on f2. Anyway, so after he played d4, I took. So I wouldn't have to worry about my e5 pawn. He took back. And then I dropped my bishop back to b6. So this is a position which is better for white. It's not like it's winning, but because I haven't taken my chances to equalize, and I did this somewhat unusual knight maneuver. It's not totally unheard of, but maybe not the best move in the circumstances. He was able to get a big center here. And he's got good squares for his pieces. The bishop can come out. The knight can come to either c3 or d2. And white has the advantage in space in the center there. So white should be better here. Let's see. He dropped his bishop back to c2. I played knight to g6, just continuing my path to the king's side. And he went b3. So he's preparing to develop his bishop out to this square. And look for some pressure against the king here. I guess there's still possibilities of the bishop coming out to these squares as well. So maybe he's just being flexible at this point. Let's see, but I need to develop my bishop. So I develop it to b7. There weren't so many great squares along this diagonal, and I wanted to put pressure on his e-pawn here. So he goes rook to e1, defending his pawn. And now I go knight to h5. So still building up towards the king side, I'm eyeing this f4 square. And this knight h5 move is nice when you can get away with it. You have to be careful because there's going to be discovered attacks when this knight moves against the loose knight here. But the knight is going to drop into f4. And his bishop is guarding that square, but the knight is defending the other knight. So it's a way to get there. The chess engine would play this slightly differently. It would go rook e8 first, and then knight bd2. Of course, knight bd2 is not forced. He could have also put the knight on c3, but then knight to f4 directly. So I just thought it was interesting. The chess engine also is eyeing this f4 square, just would get there by a slightly different route. Anyway, so knight h5 is okay. He goes knight to c3 here, and I put my knight on the f4 square. And then he played the move knight e2. So I guess he had seen this coming, and I was a little chagrined, I guess, to see this knight showing up on e2, because that kind of reduces the utility of this knight. It's got nowhere to go really, except to trade itself off, or I mean, it could retreat here, but that's actually not looking like a very good square. It could immediately get harassed. So I pretty much have to trade it off. So I took this knight. Well, it's not the same knight, I guess, but I've done a lot of knight maneuvers, and at the end of the day, I just have to trade one of them off. So not a total success for me, but, well, it's not fatal either, so it's still a game. Both sides have the bishop pair. My bishops are looking pretty active. There's something a little awkward about White's piece placement here, but there's nothing wrong with White's position either, I guess. So it's just a game. Rook to e8, just putting more pressure on the e-file. He goes queen to d3, defending the e-pawn and setting up ideas of a battery, looking at h7 there, which can be very dangerous. But this knight on g6 is actually doing a good job at this point, so I wasn't particularly worried about this idea of the queen coming here and taking on h7, because this knight is a solid defender. It's just a roadblock in the way. And so I was just looking for ways to get more play, and I went with this c5 move. This is often an idea. You're gaining space on the queen side. You often see this particular pawn structure in the Ruy Lopez on the black side. And White has to make a decision. If he trades, this would probably lead to a queen trade, and then I could look forward to trying to gang up on that e-pawn, which is a little bit loose. It's not really isolated because it's got the f-pawn here, but the knight is in the way of the f-pawn defending the e-pawn. So he pushed forward with d5, which I think is the better way to play. But this also gives me some ideas. It leaves him with the backwards e-pawn, and I can route my bishops around. I can also push the c-pawn forward to open up this bishop. So still okay position. I started with queen to f6. I wanted to connect my rooks, be able to shuffle my rooks back and forth, really maybe bring a rook here and push the c-pawn forward. And I saw I could do this move with tempo because it hits his loose rook in the corner. So I was getting my queen out to an active post before he had a chance to play a bishop to b7 and stop that. And notice that he can't play bishop to b7 here because that square is unguarded as well. The queen will just take it. So this is a pretty interesting position. And my opponent came up with a tactical idea that just doesn't quite work. So before we show the game, let's just show what the chess engine would play here. It would just move the rook to b1. It also prepares bishop to b2, hitting my queen. And then I would go knight to f4, hitting his queen. And so bishop takes, queen takes, and then e5. So now this battery suddenly springs to life. He's got this threat on h7, but I can block with g6. And this position is okay. It's even slightly better for black if you believe the chess engine. So this is how the game probably should have continued. Notice that if he takes here, I can take back with the queen. I've got a pawn indirectly, or I don't know if that's indirect, but I've got the pawn guarded by the queen here. And if he pushes on, I can trade and blockade the pawn on e6. So actually that turns out to be a good position for me. And so that's all right. Anyway, that's how the game should have gone, and slight edge for black maybe. Instead, he played the move e5, and this is a pretty interesting tactical idea. Do you want to, if you might want to pause the video here and see if you can figure out what tactic black or white was shooting for here. What was his idea with this e5 move? Okay, yeah, if you want to think about this some more, pause the video. I'm going to give the answer away now. So I took, and he played the move bishop to g5, and that was his idea. My queen is nearly trapped here, and you'll see there's only one square it can go to. The bishop guards this square, his queen guards this square, this diagonal is out. This diagonal is blockaded by my pawn. That was the idea of that pawn sacrifice. I take back with a pawn, and my queen has no longer got this escape route on this diagonal. Can't escape on this diagonal. And in this direction, his pawn is guarding these squares. So my only move is queen d6, the only square. Of course, it wasn't hard to find, so I naturally just moved there, and he's just down a pawn at this point. So you might wonder, well, what was he thinking here? If you look at this position, before he plays the move e5, my queen can't go to the d6 square because the pawn is already there. So it's like a slight error in calculation. The persistence of this pawn, the idea that the pawn is still there on d6, blocking my queen from going there, would have led to a queen trap and a complete disaster. But anyway, I think that's interesting because it's a very typical kind of calculation error, and one that I've made myself many times. So I can sympathize with him. So you can see that my opponent, as I mentioned, he had been a B player and he just dropped down. You can see he's got the tactical ideas there, but it just wasn't working for him in this case. He just overlooked that one thing. So that's the kind of thing that can be caused by not being a little bit rusty, I guess. So here, after queen d6, he played rook a to e1, just doubling up on my e-pawn here. And actually, I didn't play the best move here. If you want to think about this position a little bit, what's the best move right here? It's not hard to find. Okay, yeah, pause the video if you want some time to think about it. I'm going to give the answer away. The best move is a very simple f6. It just hits his bishop, and it protects his pawn at the same time. The bishop has to drop back, and then I can grab on d5, and actually end up being 2 pawns up. So that would be best play for me. Instead, I took on d5 immediately. I don't know why. Maybe I was thinking this pawn was defended, but it's not. He's got 2 rooks and a knight on it. So I've got a rook, a queen, and a knight. Yeah, maybe I thought I could hold on to that pawn here. But, well, he just trades queens. And now this pawn is under-defended, and he grabs the pawn. So he got one of his 2 pawns back. So I'm just up 1 pawn, and we're getting into a minor piece endgame, or it's a middle game, I should say. A queenless middle game. There's too much force to call this an endgame just yet. But, well, I keep trading and take it all the way down to an endgame. I guess that's what happens. So we can call this an endgame here with rooks and bishops. Let's see, there was one, actually the chess engine likes the move knight to f8 here, kind of funny, rather than trading all the way down to the endgame. The endgame is not entirely clear, so it's not clear that I have a winning endgame at this point. But let's show what happens in the game. Let's see, he took, I took, he takes. Okay, so, and I have to save my bishop, and I go bishop to e6. I was a little bit worried about my back rank here. And then he went bishop to e7, hitting my c-pawn here. But that actually was not the strongest move. There was another move I was a little more worried about here during the game, which is bishop e3, because this not only attacks the pawn, but also pins it. I can't just push that pawn forward. Now, it turns out I can still save that pawn. Well, first I have to defend it. And then he can, if he tries to play b4 immediately, this is actually the line I was a little bit worried about, but it turns out this is okay because when I take, my rook is hitting his bishop. So I hadn't calculated that far ahead. Of course, he didn't play bishop e6, so I think I would have spotted that if he'd actually played the move. It was just that before he moved, in this position, I was thinking, what do I do if he plays his bishop e7? And I certainly was going to play, I mean, if he plays this bishop to e3, hitting it that way. And I certainly was going to play rook c8, defending the pawn, but wasn't so sure what would happen after b4. So that was the answer there. So anyway, best play here is bishop e3, rook c8, and then not b4, but f4, trying to exploit this bishop here. G6 to stop that pawn from coming forward. G4, king G7, getting the king off the back rank. King G2, and rook to C6. And this finally is is okay for me because I've defended the pawn, so I'll be able to push this guy forward. So because he couldn't play that b4 move immediately, I have enough time to organize my pieces and prepare to push that pawn forward. So I stay a pawn up in that line. But this line is just a little bit easier for me to play. He goes bishop e7, go rook to c8. Oh, I didn't go rook to c8. I could have played rook c8. Let's see, I just played I played c4 immediately. And just, let's see, yeah, I guess I wasn't sure where the best square for my rook was going to be. c4 still is okay. Let's see, he takes. And, well, this is kind of an interesting position, too. I have two ways to take back. I could take back with the bishop, which has the advantage of giving me these connected pawns, so I still will be able to get a passed pawn here on the outside. Or I could take with the pawn, which you know, splits my pawns so they're not connected, but it gives me a passed pawn immediately. And eventually I went with b takes c4. I guess what I was thinking in this line, if bishop takes, my back rank is a little bit exposed to attacks from the bishops, and he can sort of harass my rook and kick it around with his bishops. And yeah, I was just a little bit worried that I might get into trouble. Now the chess engine is not at all afraid, so I guess there's always some move I have. But I've been in positions before where my rook got trapped by the raging bishop pair, and it's something to watch out for. And of course, it's dangerous for me to ever lift my rook because my king is still subject to a back rank mate here, so he can move his bishop with tempo. So anyway, that's at the end of the day, I decided to take with the pawn because in addition to giving me this passed pawn, it also gave me a secure square for my rook. It's a little bit takes more moves for him to bring his bishops around to harass my rook. So that was what I was thinking. The chess engine, by the way, rates those two moves as about equal. I think it slightly prefers bishop takes, but they're both leading to a pretty good advantage for black. Let's see. So he did go bishop to e4 here. I went rook c8, and he dropped his bishop back to c2, blockading this pawn. So I went g6, giving my king some lift, and also, you know, I was offering this tempting square to his bishop because I saw that if he went bishop f6, which he did play that move, it's a very tempting move because it looks like it's restricting my king. But I saw I could force a trade, and just getting rid of one pair of bishops, while maybe it's not objectively the best move, it makes it easier for me to play. So I was happy to play this. And I just wanted to mention the chess engine also gives bishop to f6 as the best move for white. So I went bishop d8, and that forces a trade. The bishop has nowhere to go, and that's what. So he went ahead and took. And now this is still an endgame where I'm a pawn up, and I would certainly play for the win. But I think white maybe still has chances to hold. It's really his next move that that gives the game away. He plays king to h2, and I'm not sure what he was thinking there. He really needs to play king to f1. Very that first of all, it's he's not getting mated on the back rank. His king comes out, and the action is over here on the queen side where my passed pawn is. So this is the right direction. So yeah, I'm not quite sure what he was thinking when he went king to h2. Maybe he's trying to come out this way and just trying to avoid those checks from my rook. Actually, my rook can't even go to that square, can it? Because his bishop is guarding it. So that was nonsense. So yeah, I'm not sure why he went that direction, but this opens it up to a fork here. Opens up the second rank to a fork. And so he's just down another pawn at this point. He played bishop to b1 to guard this pawn. I played rook b2 to put pressure on his bishop and keep the pressure on this pawn. This pawn is loose. I could just take it. Let's see. But I wanted to force his pieces back. He went rook e1, and then I played king f8, so just bringing my king over to help push this pawn through. At this point, the chess engine says rook takes f2 is really the best move. So, I've driven his pieces back, so I've accomplished what I had to accomplish, and now the best move is just to gather gather the material. But I thought this king f8 move was also winning, and I think maybe it is. Just I'm getting my king over more quickly. So he went back to g1 with his king. And a bit inconsistent. It actually would have been slightly better for him to continue with king to g3, just come out this way. Because, well, we'll see in the game, from g1 it's not as easy for his king to get in the game. I have various tricks I can play with the bishop coming out here once this pawn goes forward. Let's see. So he went king g1. I went king e7, king f1, sorry, king f1, and brought my king forward to d6. He went a3 here, so he's trying to keep my king from getting into this b4 square, which makes a lot of sense. I just lifted my rook up to harass that pawn, force it forward, and then brought my king to c5. So now my king has a way into the position on the dark squares here. So he went bishop to c2, harassing my rook. Dropped my rook back to b2, and he went rook to c1, defending his bishop, and king to b4, bringing my king in. And now king to e1. So he is getting his king step by step a little bit closer, and I push on with c3. Let's see. And he played f3, which I think is kind of a waiting move. Well, also it prepares his king. His king can move away from defense of the f-pawn. So in addition to being a waiting move, it means that pawn no longer needs to be defended. But actually the g-pawn is loose behind it. Yeah, so probably that was just a waiting move. And I went bishop to b3 here. I just want to trade those pieces off and get to a winning king and pawn endgame. He should probably avoid the trade. The chess engine says bishop to e4 is the best move here, but that would lose another pawn, and so that would also be winning. But the way he played it, the win is a little bit easier for me. He played king to d1, and now everything, it's a fire sale on all the pieces. Bishop takes, he has to take with the rook, and rook takes with the king, and then I just play a5, and he resigned at this point. I'm going to be able to drive his king away from defense of this pawn and grab the a pawn. Well, there's lots of ways to win it. If he tries to stay in touch with my pawn by playing here, I can bring my king forward, and then I win by just directly queening. Or he steps away, and I can grab this pawn, and then I'll have two pawns coming down on this side of the board. And these pawns, he can push them forward if he wants to stall for time, but eventually they will lock up over here on the king side. So he resigned at this point. So it was a nice game. I think, the key turning point was when he played that tactic to try and trap my queen that didn't quite work. And so he was just down material, down a pawn at that point. And even though I didn't play the most accurate moves after that, I did keep an advantage the whole way, and so it would have been very tough to hold a draw in any case. So that was round 2, and so after 2 rounds I have a score of 2 points. And so my next game, this was Friday, my next game is Saturday morning, round 3, and I will be back with my round 3 coverage. See you then.